Hey guys, today we're going to be covering data types. This video is going to be the first video in a series where I teach you guys the fundamentals of programming. I'm going to try to teach you guys things in a way that's very intuitive and that I think of them as I work throughout my workday as a software engineer in Disney. Now, as for how we're going to type in our code, we're going to open up Terminal, just like I was teaching you guys in my previous video. I'm going to zoom in for you guys. Then I'm going to change the directory to my desktop folder, and I'm going to create a file that I'm going to start writing my Python code in. See that here. I'm going to double click that to open it with TextEdit, and we're going to write our code with TextEdit. Let me just resize and move some of these things. Zoom in. And something I didn't tell you guys in my previous video was that if you want your TextEdit looking like mine, you simply go to Preferences for TextEdit, uncheck all of the options, and make sure you're using the plain text format. So let's dig into data types. Data types are a mechanism for us to capture real-world concepts and put them into our code. Now, the benefit of that is that if we can capture real-world concepts into our code, we can start working with real-world things or data that represents real-world things. The most basic data type that I can think of in Python is the integer. And the integer represents a whole number. So a whole number like 1,000, for example, okay? So another critical concept to data types in Python is that every data type comes with a way of creating an example of the data type. So what I mean by example in the case of an integer is that we have integers, and an example of an integer would be an actual number like 1 or 2 or 3 or 100 or 1,000. And this concept of creating examples is actually called a literal. So one example literal of an integer is 1,000. Funnily enough, this is actually valid Python code. Python is going to look through all these lines and execute them. And what it's going to do when it sees this number is it's going to reserve some space in my computer for this number, even though it doesn't do anything with it. So let us run this program and see that it works. And it works. There was no crashing. Now, if we want to look inside of our program in Python, what we could do is called the print function. And how we do that, we type in print, open parentheses, close parentheses, and we take the value we want to print and put it inside the parentheses. Let's run our program again, and we can see what's inside of our program. We can see that we created this integer literal that has a value of 1,000. Cool. Now, another thing we can do with literals is assign them to variables. And variables are a major concept in programming because they contain an example of a data type for us to work with. As I was saying before, it's useful to work with examples of data types. So let's do something that you would see in math, and let's assign 1,000 to x. So now, whenever we want to reference this 1,000, we can reference it by referencing x. So now let's print out x. And we should see the value that's inside of x. So what happens behind the scenes is that Python is going to run all of these lines one by one. And when it sees x now, it's going to replace it with what's inside of the value of x. Cool. Now, we went over the major concepts that I'd like to go over with data types. Now, for the sake of those that are curious, I'm going to show you guys some more data types. We have 1,000, which is a literal of an integer. Now, if we want to start creating text in our program, right? Like if I want to save my name, I'm not going to save it as an integer. I would save it as text. And the data type for text in programming is usually called a string. The way we create a string is that we type in quotes, and you have to be consistent with the quotes. They can either be double quotes or single quotes. So I'm going to type in my name in here. Or let me type in a whole sentence. Hello, my name is Ronnie. Now we have a string literal, an example of a string. We can also save that to a variable. Let's call that variable sentence equals this. X equals 1,000 up here. And there's a bunch more data types that we're going to be working with. And another important one that we're going to work with often is the Boolean data type. So the Boolean is something in programming that represents true or false. We can say bool1 equals true. This is one literal for a Boolean. The other literal for a Boolean is false. Cool. Now, the last data type that I want to get into in this video is the list. The list is going to be very useful for us. It's an example of a data structure, which I'll cover in another video. But to create a list, we pretty much type in brackets, and then we can start creating other values inside the list. We collect things in a list, right, as we do in real life. So we can collect numbers together. We can collect strings together. We can collect booleans together. We can collect a lot of things together, and we can assign that to our list here. List equals this. Cool. Now this is all valid Python code. If I run this, it'll all run. I didn't print out any of these, but I could. Okay, that's all I'm going to cover for now. The major thing I want you guys to take away from this quick video is that we have in programming data types, and we have ways of creating examples of those data types. And I'm going to be using that a lot in my next videos. So, thank you for tuning in. And next up, we're going to see how to work with conditions.